Well, another day, another escalation in the ongoing tensions between the United States and Iran. This time, however, the escalation was not carried out by either the U.S. or Iran directly, but rather this time it was carried out by the United Kingdom. Apparently this week in their Iberian enclave of Gibraltar, there was a tanker stationed, or I guess docked there, is what you'd say. It's not a military vessel. Docked there temporarily, I would assume, on its way traversing the Mediterranean Sea, which was seized by the British government for allegedly carrying Iranian oil, which, of course, Iran is not allowed to export their oil, apparently. That, of course, a part of the U.S.'s maximum pressure sanctions campaign. Now, of course, we know that Iran has been shipping out their oil anyway at a great discount. You can get a great deal if you actually are someone who purchases Iranian oil. And I'm sure that's why the government, or I guess not necessarily the government, but the Syrian economy, somebody in there, maybe a private oil importer, whoever, decided to contract with the Iranians, according to the British, to buy some Iranian oil. Now, of course, no need to be coy about it. This obviously is not between the British and the Iranians. The British themselves, the British people in Great Britain really don't care about Iran. And of course, you've got some folks, like say opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn and others who are somewhat sympathetic to Iran's position. But with regard to foreign policy, really, the United Kingdom is a satellite state of the U.S., and so they are really acting in this case on the U.S.'s behalf, despite the fact that the British claim that they did this all on their own and that this had nothing to do with the U.S. John Bolton immediately chimed in and said, oh, this is a great decision on the part of the British. They're doing a great job to enforce European Union sanctions, which I thought was pretty funny. He purposefully did not cite American sanctions because he wanted to make this look like the British were acting independently of the U.S. and that this is the whole world teaming up against Iran. It's not just the U.S. And its satellite states acting against Iran. And of course, the EU sanctions he's referring to are not even against Iran, they're against Syria, which I don't know how the EU can sanction Syria, considering that Syria is not a part of the European Union. It's not even in Europe. Now, perhaps the European Union can sanction Syria in the sense that Syria would not be allowed to import anything from the European Union. It would make sense if, say, the EU were telling all of their member states, hey, you can't trade with Syria anymore because we're mad at them for whatever reason. Obviously, the U.S. does that all the time with Americans. Americans are not allowed to buy Cuban cigars. Does that really help the people down in Cuba? Does that stop Castro? I mean, obviously it hasn't, but it's something that the government chooses to do. The interesting thing about this case is that here you have these EU sanctions being applied, apparently to Syria, in a case in which there are no European countries involved. You have Syria, which is not in the European Union, and you have Iran, which is not in the European Union, who apparently, the people in these two countries, came to some sort of business agreement. They decided to exchange oil, presumably for money, or maybe some kind of barter goods, but I would assume money. And then here you have an unrelated third party, the European Union, apparently embodied in this case by the United Kingdom, which, again, why would the United Kingdom waste their resources enforcing EU sanctions when they're supposed to leave the EU soon anyway? I don't know. But here you have this independent third party, and they come in and say, no, you're not going to make that deal. We don't approve, when they were never a party to the transaction to begin with. And to me, this is the most disgusting form of imperialism imaginable. I have much less of a problem with what the British or the French or the Ottomans or whoever else used to do, back in the 19th century and before, when you had honest imperialists, to where people said, hey, if I want to control a country, I'm going to invade it, I'm going to plant my flag, and I'm going to say I'm the government now. It was very simple. It was, hey, if my flag's here, I control this space. Nowadays, you have two countries that are completely governmentally related, completely independent from the European Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Iran and Syria are not colonies of anybody. They're independent countries. Yet there is still this pretense that the European states and that the United States have some sort of authority over these countries. And is that authority justified because, they say, hey, we're the world empire and we control everything, and you're all our measly subjects? No. They say we're doing it for the sake of humanitarianism, because we're so good and righteous. That's why we're interfering and we're not allowing you to trade in oil between two mutually benefiting parties. Now, of course, what's the impact then of these sanctions that apparently the EU feels that they can enforce? Again, remember, with this has nothing to do with the United States, apparently. The U.S. ongoing tensions with Iran, this is completely separate. This is between the European Union and Syria, allegedly. What are the effects of these EU sanctions on Syria? Well, if Syria can't import oil and their oil fields are controlled by either your rebels, your al-Qaeda guys, or Kurds, which are all, supposed to be not on the side of Assad and at war with the Assad government, well then if you live in the part of the country, which is most of Syria, that's controlled by Assad's government, you don't have access to fuel, which means, hey, in the winter, where, again, this is the desert, so you have extreme temperatures, extreme hots and extreme colds, in the winter, you don't have enough fuel to warm your house. You may freeze to death. The government has to end up rationing fuel. It makes it very difficult for if let's say you're someone who lives a little bit outside the city, and of course Syria's a pretty big country. If you have to drive a lot for a living, this becomes quite the strain on you. You may go out of business. You may not be able to afford to run your business. And I'm sure that the Syrian economy isn't doing well to begin with, considering that they've been in the middle of a civil war for I don't know how many years, 7-8 years or something. And so obviously, the EU sanctions do hurt ordinary people. One would think that that's a bit of a flaw, considering that their justification is that they put these sanctions on these mean countries for humanitarian reasons, just because they feel so bad for the people there. When in reality, the idea of these sanctions is to make life under governments that the U.S. and the European states don't like so difficult for the people that they revolt against their government, and that they overthrow them and replace them with a government that the EU and the US likes, just so they can get out from under the sanctions. And I don't know how many times they have to try this before they figure out that this has never worked out, ever. I can't think of a single case in which the U.S. or any of these other states in the modern age have sanctioned a country and tried to make it really poor, and they ended up with a government with the people rising up and overthrowing the government that they didn't like and replacing them with a government that the U.S. and others did like. Now, things did not just end there with the British seizing that Iranian ship. Now the Iranians are saying that if the British don't release their ship and send it on its way to Syria, well, then the Iranians are just going to have to seize a British ship to compensate for it, because now the Iranians have lost a ship, and so they'll need to take one from Britain. It's an eye for an eye in this case. Now, they've yet to act on this threat, because I assume they're still waiting for the British to release the ship. But I don't think the British will release the ship. The British seem to be acting pretty clearly on behalf of Mr. John Bolton. And so if the Iranians do eventually make good on that threat and seize a British ship, it'll be very interesting to see how much of an escalation that is considered to be. I imagine that Mr. Bolton is sitting in his office this morning next to the phone, just waiting for the call that the Iranians have seized a British ship, so that he can run into the Oval Office and say, Mr. President, see, I told you so. But until then, we'll just have to wait. So if you got anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here in the next one.